Let's look at these 13 typical plot beats for crime novels, and then we're going to look at how to invert them or subvert them in really fun and creative ways. Let's get started right away with number 1. Widen your cast of possible suspects. So I find a lot of writers, when they're writing their first crime novel, is they don't have enough possible suspects, at least ones that the reader thinks like, okay, maybe it's that person. They'll have 4 or 5, but what you really need are 8 to 10. So my recommendation is just to create a list of all the possible people who could have done it, and then next to their name, a reason why the reader would think they might be the guilty party. And the reason why you want to have a lot of possible suspects is the people are going to put down your book if they think they know for sure who the guilty party is. The book becomes less interesting because these books are fundamentally interactive books. The reader is playing the role of the detective or the cop or whoever it is investigating the crime, and they're trying to guess who it is. If your novel isn't interactive in that way, it's not going to be very interesting for the reader. A second really common plot beat in this genre is dive into the seedy secret life of the victim. So in the beginning, the victim of the crime will often seem to be innocent and naive, sort of this moral exemplar, but I feel like it's very common as the story progresses to find out all sort of secrets that this person was keeping. In season 1 of The Killing, we see that Rosie Larson, she seems like a typical teenage girl, but the investigation uncovers escort services and secret relationships and these connections to political corruption. Or look at Broadchurch, where even when you have a kid, Danny Latimer, he's 11 years old, he's still sneaking around and has a secret that he's been going to cuddle with a grown man. Or look at Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, where it appears that Carmen Sternwood is a normal young woman, but then it's revealed through the investigation that she's into pornography and drug use and even murder. But now, why is this good to do? Well, it blurs the lines between good and evil and challenges our assumptions about victimhood. It also adds a little bit more complexity to what could be a really straightforward investigation. And also, if you're working on a crime novel, feel free to join us in BookFox LAB, which is the mentorship program with lots of one-on-one attention and feedback on your work. I'm going to put the link in the description so you can check it out. The third typical plot beat that you want to make sure is in your crime novel is dive into the investigator's past. I do think books in this genre have a danger of being too cerebral and intellectual and a little bit dry unless we can connect with the person investigating the crime. So look at a story like Mare of Easttown, how she's really torn up about her son's suicide, and it really haunts her throughout this entire investigation. Or look at Harry Hole in the Hugh Nesbeth books. He has a mother who has died young, and that haunts him. You want to make sure your book isn't merely a cognitive exercise, but there is this emotional connection with the main characters, and giving them a backstory, often a traumatic backstory, is one way to accomplish that. Now, one really interesting story is to give the person that's investigating the crime some sort of personal history that connects to the crime they're investigating. So Tanya French wrote In the Woods, and her detective, Rob Bryan, when he was a kid, he ended up being involved in this missing disappearance where 2 of his friends were disappeared, and he was found with blood on his shoes in the woods. Later on, as a detective, he has to investigate a crime that happens in a similar location, and there's eerie parallels between those 2 crimes. What does that do? It makes it impossible for him to be very objective about the case. You know, he has something personal at stake. This fourth thing is absolutely essential for your book. You want to include B stories. So you can never just have a singular story of this person solving this particular case. It gets boring very quickly. So you need some sort of B story. And often this B story is something personal for the person who's investigating. Something to do with relationships they have with others, something to do with family, something to do with romance. So look at Michael Connelly's series with Harry Bosch, who is a Los Angeles homicide detective. Often his romantic entanglements with various women over the book series provide a nice B story and a nice complement to the main investigation. Or look at the Rebus series by Ian Rankin, where you have Inspector John Rebus, who is a Scottish investigator. This is more of a family B story, so it involves his complicated relationship with his daughter, Sammy. He is an absent father because he's a workaholic. At one point, she gets kidnapped because of his work on a case, and also she just doesn't want a relationship with him, which complicates everything. A fifth absolutely crucial step you need to do in your book is expose the flaws of the investigator. So in this genre, there's one flaw which stands above all others, which gets used more than all others, and you know what it is without me even saying it: alcoholism. In Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe books, Marlowe's flaws is drinking. right? And then there's been a long list of imitators after that point where they all drink too much. Now, you can use that flaw, but I also think at this point it can seem a little cliche, so I want to give you some other options for other flaws that your investigators can have. Or they could just have a personality flaw. Hercule Poirot is vain, fussy, and narcissistic. Or you could give your character some sort of moral flaw. In the first season of True Detective, one of the main characters has a sexual flaw where he keeps on cheating on his wife. And this flaw is really interesting because it mirrors the criminal he's investigating who commits crimes of sexuality. This means they have more in common rather than being just a pure good versus evil. Or your character's flaw could be drug abuse. Think about Sherlock Holmes and his addiction to cocaine and morphine. This 6th point is the most important one in this entire video. It is losing the badge. Losing the badge is such a good move in a story like this because it makes your character into a kind of outsider hero. Plus, it strikes at one of their most important desires, the desire to be a cop or a detective or a private eye. And it creates this huge obstacle in their way for them to be able to solve the case. So for all those reasons, this is one of the most popular story moves in the genre. And you can't blame the writers. It works. The trouble is that, like the alcoholism, this story twist can feel a little bit cliche and overused. So what do? You understand why this works, and then you can do little variants upon it. In a broader sense, this is another B story of a career struggle. So you have a B story with, say, romance or family, you have this B story with a career struggle, and then you have the main storyline. So what sort of variations can we do? Well, look at Nesbuz the Redbreast. Harry Hole doesn't get kicked off the force, no, but he's sort of like on the outside and people look down on him. Or in Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon, he's already sort of an outsider as a private eye, but what career thing happens to him that's bad? Oh, his partner gets killed. Okay, that still fulfills that B story role of threatening his career. A 7th thing you often want to do when writing this genre is to add some grittiness. So a lot of people read a genre like this because they like seeing the grittier side of existence. They enjoy that sort of rush, that thrill. And you can give them that grittiness in a lot of different ways. You could just have full-out violence, like the way James Ellroy's LA Confidential starts. It starts with this bloody Christmas scene where you have these drunk cops beating these Hispanic prisoners. You could also do it with depraved characters. Look at Dennis Lehane's Mystic River, how a lot of those characters' lives and desires are just sort of sordid and horrible. You could also just do it with some gritty language. Look at all of Elmore Leonard's books. He has so much swearing in them. I mean, he has blue-collar characters, and they speak like blue-collar characters. Now, I will say, if you're writing more of a cozy genre, then obviously you don't want this sort of grittiness. You want to tone that down because your audience wants these type of storylines, but without the grit. The 8th plot beat you want to make sure you include in your book is to connect the threads. So even though, say, 7 out of your 8 possible suspects are going to be innocent, they can't be the ones that committed the crime, right? You still want to make sure they're guilty in other ways. They're not completely innocent. Perhaps one suspect called the victim that night, but they lie about it and say, oh, no, I didn't call. You can also have a connection by having one of the suspects be a family member. So there's some sort of familial connection to the suspect, but they're also suspected of killing them. You can also have the investigator himself or herself have friends or relatives in the mix, and that complicates their relationship with the possible suspects. Just remember that even your innocent suspects should be lying in one way or another because they have something to cover up, even though they're not covering up the main crime. The 9th step, which you definitely should not skip, is to connect the crime with the larger picture. So you have to make a choice between having your story be a single off or having the crime connect to a larger group or social condition. A single off is very simple. You have a person, they're wicked, they commit a crime. End of story. But a lot of stories end up using that murder as a springboard to indict a whole group of people in society. You could springboard into a serial murder. Oh, this was only the first crime. You could also connect the crime to a group of people or a larger organization. Some really popular ones would be politicians or organized crime, super wealthy people, the church, or say the police themselves. So in Walter Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress, His hero, Easy Rollins, discovers that the crime involves both politicians and organized crime. What the storyline allows you to do is to talk about our culture in general. Which institutions are rotten? What group of people are guilty beyond the singular person who committed the crime? In True Detective Season 2, it's a group of corrupt cops. And in Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, it's the Catholic Church because it's set in a monastery. Okay, let's get to the 10th thing you want to include in your book. It is misdirect. So obviously the typical goal of a crime novel is to not allow the reader to guess who the guilty party is. If they can guess, then it sort of takes all the air out of the narrative balloon and they don't want to continue reading. So what that usually looks like is in every single chapter, you are leaning toward a new character, giving the reader information why this particular person might be guilty. And then in the next chapter, you're steering them towards a new possible suspect. In the next chapter, another possible suspect. Now, there's two main mistakes that writers make with this. One is they don't include enough misdirections. If you only misdirect a couple of times, it's going to be easy for the reader to sort of see through that and be like, I know who it is. The second main mistake that they make is that the misdirections aren't strong enough. You really have to convince the reader that maybe it is this person. Now, can you go too far with misdirections? Yes, absolutely you can. The trouble with too many misdirections is that it ends up muddling up the storyline, and suddenly now your reader is confused rather than trying to decide between who the potential guilty party is. Okay, so we have 3 more points, and this 11th one is a doozy. It's genius. It is, don't forget a central object. So I love it when there's an object in the case that we've seen all throughout the entire storyline, but it never had any sort of special meaning. And all of a sudden, that central object takes on a new light and it helps the person solve the case. So in Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, we see the dollhouse. We've seen the dollhouse all throughout the book and the movie. And then suddenly we realize that dollhouse, the floor is made of human teeth. And that detail ends up helping her to solve the case. Or if you want to go old school, look at Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, The Adventure of the Speckled Band. There was a bell pull rope, which was a cord you pull to ring a bell to get the servants to come. But Holmes realizes, wait a second, it doesn't actually ring a bell. So that's the clue that that was the device, the rope was the device that a snake came down to bite the guilty party. No, not the guilty party, the innocent person who is killed. 12th step you want in a book like this is to add a surprise or a twist at the end. So you could have the surprise be that the person wasn't murdered at all and they're actually alive somewhere else. You could have the surprise be that the killer has a multiple personality disorder and it was one of their other selves that committed the murder. You could have the surprise that the person closest to the investigator is the one who committed the crime. You could even have the surprise be that the person investigating the crime is the guilty party. Now, if the crime is something like kidnapping rather than murder, it could be that at the end, the kidnapped victim is switched. You could have the surprise be that it's not just one person guilty of murder, but everyone was guilty. You could also have a surprise be that the guilty party is not arrested, but killed. Or you could have it that the suspect kills themselves when they feel that the police are closing in. There's an infinite amount of surprises or twists that you can come up with for the end of a book, but I just want to lay those out so you really see the range of what you can do with the ending of a story like this. You don't want to have it taper off and sort of have a quiet ending. No, surprise the reader. Show them something that they didn't see coming. All right, now let's talk about point number 13, the very last one. Resolve the B story. So a lot of writers feel that when the main suspect is caught, well, that's kind of the ending to the story. But that's not the true ending of your story. The true ending of your story is resolving your B story. The B story is often the emotional journey of your main character, so you really have to work at making sure that wraps up in a satisfying way. So has your main character been estranged from their daughter the entire story? Well, then the ending of your book should show them connecting in some way with their daughter, making a phone call or taking a walk or something. I really liked the ending of Mare of Easttown, where it resolves by having her go up into the attic, which is the symbol or sign of her trying to make peace with her son's suicide. It's a really big step for her, and it really helps to close off that storyline. Hey, don't forget to check out BookFox Lab. The link is in the comments. We would love to have you join our mentorship and help you along the journey of finishing your book.